Welcome to the Grief Ladies, the practical guide to what comes next. I'm Kelly Daugherty.
And I'm Karyn Arnold, and we are two grief professionals with over 50 years of combined experience. We're here to validate, educate, and give you tangible tools you can actually use.
Each episode motivates you to take action and reminds you it's okay to want to feel better. This is the Grief Ladies, a guide to what comes next.
Hi, everybody, and welcome back. I'm Karyn here with Kelly, and we are the Grief Ladies here for our F podcast. Finding is what week we are on, and we are welcoming Charlotte Shuber. So Charlotte, welcome. Really glad to have you here today to be talking about this very special topic.
Thank you so much for having me, Karyn and Kelly. I'm excited.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to start, and Charlotte, we want to hear a little bit more from you, but we do have like your official bio, which we always like to start with. So Charlotte Shuber is a licensed clinical social worker who specializes in grief and loss, works with children, teens, and adults, combining professional expertise with her own lived experience of loss. Charlotte's passionate about creating a compassionate space where people can explore grief openly, adapt to life changes, and discover meaningful ways to stay connected with loved ones who have died, with others, and with themselves. So, Charlotte, you want to tell us just a little bit more about yourself?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you. So, my journey to grief work was very circuitous, or whatever that word is. It was not direct. Just like grief itself, my journey to grief work was not this linear line. So, what happened for myself is I had a death of someone very close to me when I was 15 years old. So, and I believe in saying their names. So this person's name is Susie, and she and I were quite close. She's the person that I can say that I learned most from about probably unconditional love. She was my aunt, but she also was like a second mom to me. And she happened to, just do some really special things for me throughout my life. And I will get into more about her influence on me. But, I was 15, way back in 2001. I didn't start doing any professional grief work until an internship that began in 2016. So 15 years later. And I never intended to be a grief professional. But now that I am, there's no going back. It is, as my bio says, it is a true passion of mine and something that's very important to me and just imbues and touches every corner of my life. I can share a little bit about where you can find me toward the end in terms of where I'm working, because there's several places, but I'll save that for later.
Okay. Well, that's great. And interesting that you talk about, the path to get here, because we all have a different one. But what I like what you said is I feel, and Kelly, I think, agrees that once you start doing this work, there is no turning back. There's something about it that really just draws you in. And I always stop short of calling it a calling, but that is the thing that I think people could relate to the most, that, you just feel very pulled to the work, and it's just so meaningful. And I think, probably a lot of what keeps us coming back to it is the way that we can see people grow and progress and surprise themselves, through their losses. And I think that's a lot of what we're trying to do with the work that we're doing, with the work that you're doing, in helping to show people a path and show people the way, so that they can get there themselves. So, Charlotte, we're going to, go ahead and really dive right in with some questions here. We wanted to get to know a little bit more about your work and your approach, and for people who are listening, how some of that could be help to them. So, we talk about moving forward, in grief, and I always want to clarify and make sure for people it doesn't mean moving on, moving forward. That's where time is taking us anyway. But moving forward, what does that mean to you? And how do you think people can redefine it in a way that feels honest and possible for them?
Mhm. I love that distinction between moving forward and moving on. That is so important, just like language and grief is always important.
Yeah.
So thank you for using that distinction. I think moving on implies that we had some choice or control in the matter, like you're moving on from a job that doesn't serve you anymore. And so moving forward is not that at all. It's moving forward with someone, first of all. So we're not leaving them behind. We're moving forward with them. And so that's a lot of what I help folks do is, okay, well, what could that look like for that person? I think for some people, moving forward with someone happens intuitively. And for others, I think that it's quite a challenge because they're used to seeing the flesh and blood. They're used to seeing the person. They're used to hugging them, holding them. For myself, of course, I miss those things about my Aunt Susie, but I also I was able to intuit moving forward with in a way because she had kind of prepared me. She kind of prepared me, even though her death was tragic, sudden, traumatic, and I won't get into that. She had still prepared me throughout my life by saying things like, "You are never alone. There are no coincidences, only miracles," which meant later on, anytime I had something that I thought was a sign from her and thought, oh, well, it's just a coincidence, I already had her voice in my head. Um, I was able to very early on just kind of wake up in those early morning moments in grief where you have those terrible, awful reminders and remembrances. Oh, wait, they're dead. Like you open your eyes and you're like, oh.
Yeah.
And that is not the best way to start your day. So what I started doing, even back then at 15, I was like, I'm going to do something today to make Susie smile. And so again, I was moving forward in my day with her. I wasn't just living life. And so for me, it came intuitively, but I know that that is not the case for many, many, many people. And it's looked so different for me over time. But absolutely. It is that distinction between moving on from them and moving forward with them. That's one of the big things that I think helps folks. Another thing that I think of when I think of moving forward is actually a theory. Is it okay if I share a theory?
Of course.
All right. So, and I always empower people to write your own grief theory because as many grievers as there are, that's how many grief theories are out there. Right. And so we don't need to be intimidated and think, oh, well, I'm not a researcher or a scholar. No, lived experience is most important. And so one of my favorite grief theories is called the Growing Around Grief Theory by Lois Tonkin. And I think I need to actually just hold this a different way. Okay. So, especially in our society, we are told, and people tend to think that our grief shrinks over time as life moves forward. So, grief is represented by that purple marble, we'll call it. And let me move back a little bit. So, again, Lois Tonkin, in her own work with bereaved individuals, she came up with this. Actually, I believe someone she worked with came up with this, and then it has been since expounded on. I think the jar drawing of it might have come from What's Your Grief, that website. But the marble, again, representing grief, the jar itself representing life, and time over here. So again, people tend to think that grief shrinks over time. What actually happens is that grief stays the same size, at least the same size, I'll say, but life grows around it. So you can see here that over time, the grief is there, but life has expanded around it, right? Now I'm going to add to this a little bit and say that with time, we might have some other things in our life. We're adding to our life, right? So we have some green marbles in here. We have some orange marbles in here. And we still have some more grief happening. It's changing shape. It's changing form. And maybe we have additional losses happening, right? And so when I think about moving forward, I think about this theory a lot, this growing around grief. We're not moving forward even from the grief, right? That's moving forward with us. But there's other things that are added to our life that maybe we're not there for. It's easy to think of the things that are happening in our life that we don't want to be happening because of the grief. Maybe we can't afford to live in the same house. Maybe we had to change jobs. We of course miss that person. But then there are other things that are happening in our lives that do feel fulfilling or robust or even fun. And it's all in that same container of life. So before I go on, I have a little kind of physical activity that helps demonstrate this theory. What are your thoughts on this idea of purpose and growing around grief?
Well, I absolutely love this theory. This is one of my favorites because this is exactly what we believe, right? We grow bigger than our grief, we grow through our grief, and grief is always there. Like I think the ball in the box that went around on social
Yeah.
media a long time ago. I really want to redo it because what I can't stand is that it says over time your grief shrinks, right? And it doesn't hit the pain button. No, your box just gets bigger. They got that all wrong. And that pain button is still there and the ball's still going to hit the pain button because, you don't know me, Charlotte, but my mom died when I was 14 and then my dad died 11 months ago. And so I am now an adult re-grieving my mom all over again.
Yeah.
And so my pain button is getting hit a lot, but my box is a lot bigger than it was right after my mom died. And I think, people just think that it's going to stay the same way, and it does, and evolves and it changes and it morphs with us, but it's always still there. It's not something we get over. It's something we learn to live with. And I think that, like, I love the whole continuing bonds theory, and I love the theory about that, like growing around our grief, because that's really what it is. I think it's such an act, like a fabulous visual representation. And for those of our listeners that are just listening, we'll make sure we add a picture of this, maybe in the show notes or something, so you can reference it and understand what we're talking about. But it's one of my favorites. So I'm so grateful that you brought it up. Thank you. And thank you also for talking about Aunt Susie and using her name.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Kelly.
Mhm.
Yes. So again, this is something that I'll provide a picture of, but I'm holding up just a clear jar. It's nothing special. I did paint the top of it a nice blue that reminds me of Susie. But inside this jar, this was a way for me to conceptualize for the kids that I work with at a place called Willow House, which is a childhood bereavement support program for families and children and communities just outside of Chicago. We always do an activity with them, right? Because kids don't want to just sit and talk. They want to do. And I think adults can learn from that because adults actually can do a lot of the same activities that the kids do and benefit from them as well. So inside the jar, what I have here are they're little silver pieces of paper that are heart shaped. And I just took some time and I did this about 8 years ago, and I've been adding to it ever since. What I did with these heart shaped pieces was I thought about Susie and things that either I experienced with her while she was alive or that I feel like I got from her in some way. So lessons or experiences. So this one says light and warmth. I wrote those things on these hearts. Light and warmth. What does this one say? Patience, nurturing, and caretaking. I feel like I learned those things from her. Sense of humor and silliness, because I think my own silliness was augmented whenever I was around her. And then what I started to do there are also circles, paper circles in this jar. And the circles are opaque colored paper, but they're not silver. The silver hearts were special Susie shiny hearts. And the circles are just, your regular old paper. And anything that happened in my life, not every little thing, like I ate a sandwich, but things that were a little bit more of consequence, I wrote down on these discs. So this was, I ran a half marathon. And actually, I happened to do this for something called the Gay Games, which is not anywhere near the caliber of Olympics for someone like me that's not a professional athlete, but it has that feel. And it's for, LGBTQ plus individuals like myself. And it actually was held in my hometown of Akron, Ohio. And so that is something that Susie would have been there. She would have had a sign made for me. She would have been cheering. She would have just been, my biggest supporter. She was with me on that run, but only in spirit. And I shouldn't say only because in spirit is important, but I would have loved to get a high five and a hug from her at the end of that. So there's a lot of these circles in here. And one of the things that I've had to do, and many people have to do throughout our lives, is introduce the person that died to the people in our lives.
Mhm.
I don't have really any friends that knew her because, I was 15 when she died and I live in a different state. I don't have connection with people anymore that knew her other than family, of course. So any friend that I've met, my wife, I've had to try to introduce them to her because they never got the, privilege or opportunity to meet her. And so a lot of the discs on here are people that I know that she never had the chance to meet, and they never had the chance to meet her. There's also things on here that I really would have liked her to be there for, such as my dad has recovered fully, but he had cancer at one point. And so that was his sister. We would have loved to have her support with us through that time. Being in graduate school for social work, she would be so proud of me, right? And so what this jar does is it just a representation for me of, gosh, I wish she could be here to experience these things in my life with me in person. But those little hearts in the jar remind me of her ongoing influence on me that allows me to do these things in a way that maybe I could not have done without her influence in my life. And when I reflect on this, it's very easy to say, oh, I'm a grief counselor because she died. And that's true, but it's not the whole story, because I'm also a grief counselor because of who she was when she lived and who she still is in my life. So again, I can share some pictures of this for those that are only hearing this right now. But yeah, that's just my little jar project that kids can do, adults can do, anyone can do, and it will continue to evolve over time. And the thing is, those hearts will always be in this jar, and I'm not taking anything away. I'm not ever removing those hearts, but I'm adding experiences to my life, and they're all imbued with her influence.
I absolutely love that, and I'm totally stealing that, Charlotte. I'm like, "Ooh, who can I do that with now?"
Yes.
It's just beautiful, I love that, and it goes so well with, your visual representation of the theory as well, and seeing, your jar is bigger than all of that, but you still have room, and that's what I
Yes.
like about it as well, and as as you get older, your jar may get even bigger, you might have to change jars, and that's
Right.
awesome. Yeah.
If you're looking for a place where you don't have to explain why the days feel different after someone you love has died, we created something for you. The Grief Ladies community is our private, free Facebook group where you can connect with others who get it. It's a space for steady support, real conversations, weekly prompts based on our grief framework, and guided tools you can use at your own pace.
You'll also get early access to workshops, new resources, and behind the scene updates from our podcast. If you want a community that's honest, compassionate, and grounded in practical support, come join us. Just search the Grief Ladies community on Facebook. We'd love to have you.
Well, I think it's really the idea too that, exactly what we said. We can talk about moving forward. And I think for a lot of people, it's on the surface, the idea of what we think we want. I don't want to be in pain anymore. I'm just looking
Mhm.
forward to that time when I feel differently, then I feel better than I do now. But I find with people as they are progressing, and there are sometimes maybe they're naturally feeling a little bit more like themselves. They enjoy an outing with a friend, or, something feels okay for a few minutes. But then there's just this really strange guilt that follows because, the grief is what feels like the connection. So if we're going to help people move forward, then it's really about helping them understand, like you said, bringing your loved one with you. And how do we do that? And I think what you're talking about is such a visual demonstration of what Kelly and I probably talk about with people. And, I've talked to people about, taking on the best versions of them, trying to, share their stories. And I love the idea of the people who haven't met them and introducing them and kind of I think it sometimes feels like we're trying to continue it with the people who did know them, but there is a whole host of people that we may meet after and we still want to talk about them. And that's where it gets interesting sometimes, the strangers and the new people who come in our life. So I think it's a really good reminder of how we can do that. So, Charlotte, one thing I wanted to ask you about, I think one thing that people struggle with sometimes is certainty or meaning, and trying to find some of that through this process. What do your conversations with people sound like in terms of meaning in loss?
Mm. Yes. So I feel like with everything in grief, meaning is such a personal thing. And it's also important to know, where is the question coming from, or where is that drive for meaning coming from? Is it coming from the person themselves, or is it coming from people in their life that are maybe pushing that idea on them of meaning making? So, and when I think of meaning, I also sometimes conflate it with purpose. So it's a little bit of an overlap in my head. Um, and I think it cannot be prescribed to us, right? It cannot be forced upon us. But if someone is coming to me and it's like, oh gosh, like when my person was living, I, was their caregiver, and that gave me so much meaning and purpose in my life. And now I really just don't know what to do. If they're saying that, and it's 1 month after the death, well, of course you don't know what to do. Of course, right? And if we think about non-grievers trying to find meaning and purpose in life, heck, it's really hard just going about your everyday humdrum lives to find purpose. But I think there's this pressure on, I will say, high school juniors and seniors of any kind, grieving or not, and grieving people, to find meaning or find pressure in a way that we don't necessarily do to other populations. And so part of what I do with people is just let them know that it's normal to not be finding this beautiful, robust meaning, certainly not right away. And it's normal to even push back against that notion at first. But then as you grow and as you progress forward again, kind of just being curious for, okay, well, is there a spark? Is there something that's coming up for me? Sometimes that is tied to values. And when someone we love immensely dies, it often brings values into focus. Maybe we were prioritizing things like work before, and now it's like, oh my gosh, actually, time with people I love matters the most. And it takes, it just shifts our focus in a different way. And so sometimes that meaning can be related back to values. It's often related again to this idea of moving forward with someone. The purpose, the meaning is often related back to that person. But again, I think people sometimes pressure themselves. Oh, I'm not doing this, I didn't start a family foundation, or I'm not doing a golf outing, or I didn't, start a race. And it's like, no, no, that's okay. If you cooked a meal for your neighbor, that could be something that you're doing that gives you meaning and purpose and honors your person. Maybe you shared a favorite recipe with them.
Yeah. Yeah. I do think it does almost start to feel like pressure for people sometimes. And whether that's coming from other people or that's coming from themselves. But, it's like there's all the small day to day stuff that you're trying to reconcile. And then there's all these big questions that come in. And I think, for a lot of people, there's kind of that idea. They'll say, oh, well, everything happens for a reason. And, in earlier parts of your life, like if you don't get a job or if, the house that you put a bin on doesn't go through, like those are some of the things that we say to comfort ourselves. And in some of those situations, maybe it works, maybe it makes sense. But if we're someone who's used to that logic and then we have a really significant loss and we're like, well, what's the reason? Now what? This doesn't make sense. This wasn't the plan. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. So I think we take that similar approach of trying to take some of the pressure off of meaning and instead thinking about what matters. Because those are similarly aligned but yet very different in the approach, especially because it makes it very present focused in what we can be doing and how we can be connecting with people here in the present, but then also, with our loved one.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
And, when you use the word logic, like the logic just doesn't apply, especially in the wake of grief and early loss. I mean, of course, like we have those shattered world assumptions that are talked about in the grief world, right? Nothing really seems to make sense anymore. And so it's hard to architect new, what are those, new life schemas. It's hard to architect those.
Yeah. Yeah, it really is. There's a lot of rebuilding that is being put on a person, and that's why sometimes when those very big questions come up, it's like let's try and focus on our present and get through, and get through the day. Because to me, it goes beyond the grief. It becomes more philosophy, in terms of what are we doing here? What's the purpose of all of it? Those are big questions at any point in life. But especially, but I think the pressure to answer some of that because it's such a significant event. So trying to lower the volume on that, I think is important. That's for sure.
Oh, I like that analogy. Lower the
Yeah.
volume, just turn it down.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Well, Charlotte, I want to switch gears just slightly because I'm curious on something that I know you're passionate about, and it's working with the LGBTQ um, IA plus. Sorry, I can never remember all the letters. Community, and just what are some of the unique grief needs in that community, and what are some suggestions about to be able to help support queer and trans individuals?
Yes, yes. Thank you for bringing that into the space. So there's often a lot of non-death grief in that community, in a part of the community. I'm part of the community. So in our community, there's a lot of non-death losses that happen. You think about coming out and family estrangement that happens. You think about something as simple as a wedding. When I was planning my own wedding, there was a time when frankly, I was told that there would be people from my family that were not coming to my wedding. They had a change of heart, mostly initiated by my grandmother, who put her foot down and was like, "You're going to get there. You're going to go to that wedding."
Good
But
for
no,
her.
to my family's credit, their hearts have grown and they've become inclusive. They have done a lot of transformation, and I really credit them. But you think of life events that are for, cisgender heterosexual populations are just not even a thing, right? Like it's like, well, of course the whole family's going to come to your wedding if you're, a cisgender straight couple.
Mhm.
But there's these undertones of grief for those of us in the queer community that are everywhere, I will say. And you kind of get used to navigating those in a way that speaks to our resiliency, but also it's sad that we get used to navigating those. I
Absolutely.
think when it comes to then death losses within the queer community, sadly, again, there's that disenfranchisement. There are people that feel that they cannot safely stand up and say, that person who died, they were a good friend of mine, but they weren't just my friend. They happened to be my life partner, or they happened, to be the love of my life. And talk about disenfranchisement, they not that friendship is not to be, honored, but here they are in a room full of people and everyone thinks they're equal footing when really this was that person's one and only. And I think people assume that this stuff doesn't happen, that it's just talked about, but it's true. That it
Oh,
happens.
it's so true.
Yeah.
It's so true. I mean, I always share when I do trainings about a story about disenfranchised grief of a woman whose partner died, but she lived in the southern states, and there was fear of people showing up at the funeral, so they did not include her partner in the obituary for her
Mm.
safety. And
Yeah.
it's just awful. Like that person's grief was totally, not allowed to be valid in the community and in the paper. I mean, gosh, like and that's not something that happened a long time ago. That's only a few years ago.
Right, right. And I think that's the misconception is like, oh, that was happening 15, 20 years ago. That doesn't happen anymore. And sadly, the reality is that it does. And so just like anyone that I have the honor to work with, there's a lot of witnessing that happens. Witnessing and helping people truly feel seen and heard because there's so much dismissing that happens in our culture, even within our families and friends who are very well meaning but haven't walked the path of grief before. There's a lot of dismissal. And so really it is honoring, it is making space. I'll talk a little bit at the end, but a place that I work is literally called creating space therapy. And so literally, creating that space for the vulnerabilities of queer grief and then also just anyone and everyone's grief, anyone that comes through that door.
That's great.
Love that. Thank you for sharing that. So, we are coming to the next part of our podcast, one of my favorite parts, where we talk about celebrate their life, which is really based on a lot of what we've been talking about today, continuing bonds and staying connected. And so, Charlotte, I love this topic because I really like to help my clients shift from focusing on the ending to the death to remembering all the good, to remembering all of the silver hearts in your jar, right?
Great.
And so I am curious. I feel like, you probably do a lot of really creative ways, but how do you celebrate your Aunt Susie's life?
Ooh, thank you. Thank you for asking. And I feel like that is a question that I hope every listener here who is grieving someone gets to reflect on that for themselves. Because I think a lot of us do celebrate it, but we don't get to share that celebration. So I celebrate her in big and small ways. I actually, and I have a photo, and as I'm holding this up for those of you that are listening. So I have a photograph of the two of us, and I think this was about 2 years before her death. And I intentionally look at this photo every single day. I am a person of faith. She was a person of great faith. She loved angels more than anything else. And so I include this as part of my evening prayer. And, so that's kind of an everyday way that I celebrate her life. And then, as I mentioned before, I try to introduce her to people in my life who are very important to me right now. So my wife is one of those people who's very important to me, of course. And she did a really beautiful thing for me recently. So when Susie died, she was 39 years old. And I just turned 40. And for those of you that do grief math, it has been a roller coaster of a year for me. I just turned 40 in August. I wasn't sure, and I'm not trying to sound morbid, but I wasn't sure I wanted to turn 40. I didn't know what that was going to mean, what that was going to look like. Oh my gosh, like I'm outliving her. Ugh, it just feels weird. It feels like uncharted territory. I also had a similar time when I turned 30 because I thought to myself, oh, well, I've had her the bulk of my life. She's been there for 15 years. And it was like, okay, well, now she's been dead for 5 when I was 20. And it's like, but that's okay because I had the 15 with her. So that threshold of when the time without was greater than the time with was very difficult for me. And again, this resurgence this year of my grief, even though my grief is almost 25 years old, will be 25 years old in April. I have a lot of practice at this. It's really come back this year because of the turning 40 thing. So my wife is a very kind and attuned person, and she understands how important Susie is to me. And so for my 40th birthday, she did something that honored a past experience but made it new. So Susie took me to my first ever concert. We saw James Taylor at Blossom Music Center in Cuyahoga Falls, Ohio, not too far from where we live. And that was emblazoned in my mind forever. I remember so much about it. One of the things I remember most is when James Taylor was singing Susie's favorite song called Frozen Man. This group of people near us on the lawn started singing happy birthday, and she got frustrated because she was like, I'm trying to listen to James Taylor sing, and so that was just one of those like weird moments. And I think I was about 10 years old at the time, but it's just, really crisp in my mind. So this year my wife was like, I really would like to take you to see James Taylor, and not at Ravinia, which is way closer to where we live in Illinois, when he's going to play 2 days later, but I want to take you to Blossom because I know that's where Susie took you for your first concert. And I'm tearing up for those of you that can't see
Me
my
too.
because it was one of the most validating experiences that I could have because it honored Susie, it honored me, and it honored the grief on so many levels. It wasn't like, Charlotte, that was 25 years ago. That's ancient history. And again, my wife never met my Aunt Susie. I never met my wife until many, many years later. So the fact that she was able to really honor Susie and me and my grief in such a beautiful, memorable way was incredible. And she also had the forethought to not replicate my experience that I had with Susie. So Susie and I sat on the lawn. My wife was like, we're going to, get seats in the pavilion. And, she went all out and she got these like VIP packages that I was like, this is silly. We don't need these. And then when I was there, it was just incredible. No lines for anything. Parking was awesome. And so, yes, thank you so much to my dear, dear wife. And yes, I think that we can honor and celebrate them in these everyday things like the prayer and the picture, but also in these bigger ways as well.
I just absolutely love it. What an amazing way to celebrate Aunt Susie's life, and what an amazing wife you have.
I really do. I really do. I'm spoiled. I'm very fortunate.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Ooh, you really got me. Thank you for sharing that, Charlotte.
Of
Yeah,
course.
and that's the thing. I mean, every time an occasion comes up, whether it's our birthday, their birthday, we're always trying to figure out how am I going to honor it. And you had a big birthday, and especially with the meaning and everything that came with it. So, there's no right or wrong answers in terms of how to do that. But if it's something that feels special and meaningful and feels like a connection, I think people are usually happy that they were able to find something. We couldn't say to you, okay, you need to go to this. It has to be your experience. It has to be the thing that mattered to you. And I think sometimes we can really think too hard about it. It's like there's so much that you had with them that it's probably not as hard as you think, to
Mhm.
find those little connections. So that's really that's awesome, Charlotte. So well, we do want to hear a little bit about where people can find you. Before we get to that, though, just a takeaway, something that we can send people home with. We like to, take this idea of the to do. We can talk about grief and we can, have theories about it, but I think it's really important that we also help guide steps of what could come next. So, suggestions, if you had one for somebody listening today, of what they could do starting right now to kind of get themselves moving forward in the way that we've talked about today.
Yes, yes. Well, it's kind of an expansion on the idea of the physical jar that I have with the silver hearts inside. You don't even need to go and get special paper or cut out hearts, but just sitting down and being mindful about ways that your person's influence is still present in your life. And at first, if you're in early grief, you're going to be like, it's not there. It's very easy to think and see that it isn't. Try to ask someone else what they see, especially, if it's a friend or family member that knows about you and your grief story. Say, how do you see this person's influence in my life if you yourself can't find it? And then hopefully that kind of sparks a cascade of, oh, yes, actually, I do carry them forward in this way. And, just like you said a few moments ago, Karen, like we can't tell someone how to do this. And so maybe that works for you, maybe it doesn't. And maybe you do want to do something that is more tangible, um, like the little hearts and the circles in this physical jar. But I think the thesis of what I'm trying to say is even though they are physically not present with us, how is their influence still unequivocally present?
Before we jump back into the episode, we want to share something that's really close to both of us. The Grief Experience, Tools for Acceptance, Resilience, and Connection, is not only a powerful book, it's actually how we met.
We were two of the 25 authors who came together to write this collection. Each chapter offers a personal story about grief, different relationships, different circumstances, different ways people try to make sense of life after someone they love died. Readers tell us these stories feel honest, compelling, and surprisingly reassuring. Many say it helped them feel less alone in what they're carrying.
What makes this book unique is that it doesn't stop at the story. Each chapter ends with a practical tool, something the reader can use right away. One reviewer said the suggestions at the end of the chapter became a lifeline when they weren't sure what to do next. If you're looking for grounded support, or you're a therapist wanting to understand better the reality of grief from many angles, this book offers connection, clarity, and real guidance, not cliches.
You can find The Grief Experience on Amazon, and we'd love to get your feedback.
Yeah. I think that's great. And yes, sometimes it's a visual or sometimes it's just something meditative that you're doing, as you're driving to work or washing the dishes.
Yeah.
I think it's about being intentional. That's what we really do try to remind people to kind of make that space and that time for it. So, well, Charlotte, there's been so much here today that we're just so grateful that you've shared. If anybody wanted to get in touch with you or learn a little bit more about the work you do, how could they find you?
Yes, thank you for asking. So as I mentioned, creating space therapy. I'm a grief counselor through creating space therapy. I also work for Willow House, although I am ending that 9-year relationship because I have 3 jobs that I'm juggling at the moment. And so passing the torch on to someone that has more bandwidth to give fully and wholly. But Willow House is near and dear to my heart, always will be, as it was my first professional grief experience. And I work for Buddy's Place, a childhood bereavement program, also in the Chicago suburbs. And I have to share this because just 1 week ago, I was leaving to travel to Arizona to participate in Dr. Joanne Cacciatore's compassionate bereavement care certification. If you are caring for and supporting and showing up for people that are grieving, it's something that I cannot recommend highly enough. So now I am a CBC provider, really honored to say and share that as well, and highly, highly recommend that for anyone that is caring for the bereaved to get out there and take that training at the Sella Care Farm.
Okay. That's great. Well,
Congratulations.
yeah,
Thank
absolutely.
you. It was life altering, really.
Yeah. Well, Charlotte, we want to thank you so much for being here today. And as we said, for everything that you shared. And yeah, but definitely encourage people to find you and to get in touch. And we'll be back again next week with our next episode. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, Charlotte. Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you,
Thank
Charlotte.
you.
Thanks for joining us on The Grief Ladies.
Don't wait to feel better to get started. Getting started is what makes you feel better. Put this week's tool to work.
If today's episode helped, share it with someone who needs it and leave us a review. We'd love to hear from you.
And remember, we're here for you, your trusted grief ladies, navigating this path together.